A single mother millionaire reunited with the son she thought she had lost, and everything changed. Today, you're about to witness a story that will remind you that sometimes the greatest losses can lead to the most incredible reunions, and that a mother's love can survive any separation, any amount of time, and any circumstances life throws at it. If you're ready for this emotional journey that will touch your heart and challenge everything you believe about family, fate, and second chances, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories, and activate those notifications. Let's dive into this extraordinary tale that unfolded in the heart of Miami, Florida. The morning sun cast golden reflections across the glass walls of the 40-story office building that housed Sterling Enterprises, the real estate empire that had made Isabella Rodriguez one of the most successful Latina businesswomen in South Florida. From her corner office on the 38th floor, Isabella could see the endless blue of Biscayne Bay stretching toward the horizon, a view that had once represented everything she had dreamed of achieving, but now served mainly as a reminder of how far she had traveled from the person she used to be. At 42, Isabella possessed the kind of polished confidence that came from 2 decades of fighting for every opportunity, overcoming every obstacle, and proving every doubter wrong through sheer determination and brilliant business instincts. Her black hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed features that still carried traces of the young woman who had arrived in Miami 18 years earlier with nothing but hope and an unshakable belief that hard work could overcome any disadvantage. Isabella's office was a testament to her success. Original artwork from prominent Latin American artists covered the walls. Expensive furniture created an atmosphere of sophisticated luxury, and awards from business organizations and community groups testified to her achievements in transforming abandoned properties throughout Miami into thriving residential and commercial developments. She employed over 300 people across 12 office locations, had been featured on the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazines, and had accumulated wealth that would have been unimaginable to the 24-year-old single mother who had once cleaned office buildings at night while studying real estate law during the day. But for all her professional success, for all the recognition and financial security she had built, Isabella carried within her chest a pain that no amount of achievement could heal. 18 years earlier, she had made a decision that had saved her son's life, but had torn her own heart in half, and not a single day had passed since then without her wondering whether that decision had been the right one, whether her sacrifice had been worth the cost, and whether she would ever see her child again. The story had begun in El Salvador in 2005, when Isabella was a 24-year-old elementary school teacher living in a small town outside San Salvador with her 3-year-old son, Diego. Isabella had been married to Diego's father, Miguel, a journalist who had been documenting the escalating violence that was consuming the country as gangs expanded their territory and influence. Miguel had been killed in what police called a robbery, but what Isabella knew was retaliation for his investigative work, exposing corruption and criminal activity in their region. Left alone with a toddler to support, Isabella had tried to continue teaching while caring for Diego, but the violence had reached their town in ways that made normal life impossible. The same criminal organizations that had killed Miguel began targeting Isabella when she refused to allow gang members to use her classroom for meetings after school hours. As an educated woman in a position of community respect, she represented exactly the kind of influence that criminal organizations wanted to control or eliminate. The threats had escalated quickly. First, there had been anonymous warnings left on her desk at school. Then gang members had begun following her and Diego on their walks through town, making their presence known without directly confronting them. When direct intimidation failed to change Isabella's position, the threats had expanded to include specific details about Diego's daily routine, which playground he preferred, what time Isabella picked him up from daycare, which route they took home from the market. Isabella had realized that staying in El Salvador would mean either compromising her principles and becoming complicit in criminal activity or putting Diego in constant danger. Neither option was acceptable to a mother who wanted her son to grow up in a world where education and hard work mattered more than violence and corruption. She had also understood that her husband's murder marked her family as permanently vulnerable to retaliation, regardless of her future cooperation with criminal organizations. The decision to leave had been heartbreaking, but necessary. Isabella had liquidated her small savings account, sold her mother's jewelry, and borrowed money from the few family members who could afford to help. She had used these funds to pay smugglers who promised to get her and Diego safely across the Mexican border into the United States, where they could apply for asylum and begin building a new life together, away from the violence that had already claimed Diego's father and threatened to claim them as well. But the journey had been more dangerous and traumatic than Isabella had anticipated, despite warnings from other families who had made similar crossings. The smugglers had proved unreliable and often cruel, abandoning members of their group when conditions became difficult and showing no concern for the safety of children or elderly travelers. The route through Mexico had taken 3 weeks instead of the promised 10 days, with long periods spent hiding in abandoned buildings while waiting for safe opportunities to continue north. Diego, only 3 years old, had struggled with the physical demands of the journey and the fear that permeated every day of their travel. Isabella had carried him for miles through desert terrain, rationed their limited food and water to ensure Diego received adequate nutrition, and spent countless nights trying to comfort a frightened child who didn't understand why they had left their home or when they might feel safe again. During the final crossing through the Arizona desert, their group had been discovered by Border Patrol agents during what was supposed to be the last night of their journey. In the chaos that followed, as people scattered in different directions trying to avoid capture, Isabella and Diego had become separated in the darkness. Isabella had been running with Diego's hand in hers when they encountered a fence that required climbing. She had lifted Diego over the barrier first, intending to follow immediately, but Border Patrol lights had suddenly illuminated the area, and in the confusion of shouting agents and fleeing migrants, Diego had run in one direction while Isabella had been forced to run in another. Isabella had been captured within hours, but Diego had vanished into the desert night. Isabella had screamed his name until her voice gave out, had fought the Border Patrol agents who were processing her for detention, and had begged every official she encountered to help her find her missing son. She had been told that Diego was probably safe, that other children who became separated during border crossings were typically found quickly and placed in protective custody, but no one could give her specific information about her son's whereabouts or condition. Isabella had spent 4 months in detention while applying for asylum, desperately trying to locate Diego through a bureaucratic system that seemed designed to keep families separated rather than reunited. She had been told that Diego was safe and being cared for, but she had not been allowed to see him or even speak with him while their cases were being processed separately through different agencies and legal frameworks. During those 4 months, Isabella had learned to navigate the American immigration system while dealing with trauma that threatened to overwhelm her ability to function rationally. She had studied English with obsessive determination, understanding that language skills would be essential for advocating for herself and her son. She had also connected with other detained mothers who were facing similar separations, creating informal support networks that helped everyone cope with the uncertainty and fear that characterized their daily existence. When Isabella was finally released with temporary protected status, she had discovered that Diego had been placed with a foster family in Phoenix, and that the family had filed paperwork to begin adoption proceedings. Isabella had been devastated to learn that her son had been in care for over 4 months without her knowledge, and that legal processes were already underway that could permanently sever their relationship. Isabella had fought the adoption through legal channels, using every resource available to low-income immigrants seeking family reunification. But she had quickly learned that navigating the American family court system without money or connections was nearly impossible for someone with her legal status and limited English proficiency. The pro bono attorneys available to her were overworked and understaffed, while the foster family had resources Isabella couldn't match. The foster family, John and Sarah Martinez, had been licensed foster parents for over a decade and had a track record of successfully raising children from difficult backgrounds. They had established legal residency, financial stability, and attorneys who understood how to work within the family court system. They argued that Diego had been in their care for over 6 months, that he was bonding with their family and their 2 other children, and that removing him from their home would be traumatic for a child who had already experienced too much upheaval and loss. The legal proceedings had dragged on for 8 months, during which Isabella was allowed supervised visits with Diego twice per month for 2 hours each session. These visits had been both precious and heartbreaking for Isabella. Diego remembered her and would cling to her during their brief reunions, but he also talked enthusiastically about his foster parents, his new siblings, and the stable life he was building in Phoenix. Isabella could see that Diego was thriving in ways that might not have been possible if she had been able to maintain custody immediately after their asylum cases were resolved. He was attending an excellent preschool, receiving medical and dental care that Isabella couldn't afford, and living in a safe neighborhood where he could play outside without fear. The foster family spoke Spanish with him to maintain his cultural connections, and they had been careful to preserve his memories of Isabella and his father. Isabella had faced an impossible choice. She could continue fighting for custody through a legal system that seemed stacked against her, knowing that the process could take years and might ultimately be unsuccessful, leaving Diego in legal limbo throughout his childhood. Or she could make the most painful decision any mother could imagine. She could consent to the adoption, ensuring that Diego would have the stability, education, and opportunities that she might not be able to provide as a struggling immigrant trying to build a life in a foreign country. The decision had been made during a series of meetings in sterile conference rooms in Phoenix, surrounded by lawyers, social workers, and court officials who spoke about Diego's best interests, as if Isabella's love for her son was less important than the foster family's legal advantages. Isabella had looked at photographs of Diego playing in a backyard with toys she couldn't afford, attending a preschool that cost more than she had earned in a month back in El Salvador, and participating in family activities that provided the kind of security and normalcy she desperately wanted for him. Isabella had also spent extensive time with John and Sarah Martinez, trying to understand the people who wanted to become Diego's legal parents. She'd been surprised to discover that they were genuinely caring individuals who had entered foster care not for personal fulfillment, but out of a desire to provide homes for children who needed them. They had been honest about their motivations for wanting to adopt Diego, acknowledging that they had fallen in love with him during his months in their care, but also expressing understanding about Isabella's desire to maintain their mother-son relationship. "We don't want to erase you from Diego's life," Sarah Martinez had told Isabella during one of their most difficult conversations. "We want him to grow up knowing that he has a birth mother who loves him, who made incredible sacrifices for his welfare, and who will always be part of his story. We're asking you to trust us to raise him with knowledge of his heritage and respect for the love you share." The commitment John and Sarah had made went beyond legal requirements. They had promised that they would tell Diego about his birth mother and father when he was old enough to understand, that they would maintain his Spanish language skills and cultural connections to El Salvador, and that they would be open to contact when Diego became an adult and could make his own decisions about whether he wanted a relationship with Isabella. Isabella had signed the papers that legally severed her parental rights, but she had also negotiated an agreement that would allow her to send letters and photographs to Diego through the adoptive family until he reached 18. John and Sarah had committed to sharing these communications with Diego when they felt it was appropriate and to helping him understand the circumstances that had led to their separation and his subsequent adoption. The pain of that decision had nearly destroyed Isabella. For months after returning to Miami, she had barely functioned, working minimum-wage jobs during the day and crying herself to sleep every night, while wondering what Diego was doing, whether he missed her, whether he even remembered the mother who had held him every night and sung him lullabies in Spanish. The grief had been complicated by relief that Diego was safe and guilt that she felt grateful for circumstances that had separated them. But gradually, Isabella had channeled her grief into determination. If she was going to live with the consequences of her decision to consent to Diego's adoption, she was going to make that decision meaningful by building a life that could serve as proof to Diego, if she ever saw him again, that his mother had been worthy of his love and sacrifice. Isabella had enrolled in English classes at Miami-Dade Community College, attending sessions in the evenings after working double shifts at a commercial cleaning company. Her English proficiency had improved rapidly, driven by the understanding that language skills would be essential for any future success in America. She had also begun taking business courses, initially with the modest goal of perhaps managing a small cleaning business, but gradually developing more ambitious plans as her confidence and knowledge expanded. The transition from cleaning offices to developing real estate had taken over a decade and had required Isabella to overcome obstacles that would have defeated someone with less motivation. She had started by learning about property management while working as a superintendent for a small apartment building, then had gradually saved enough money to purchase her first investment property, a rundown duplex in a marginal neighborhood that she renovated herself during weekends and evenings. Isabella had discovered that she possessed natural instincts for identifying undervalued properties, understanding market trends, and managing the complex financial and legal processes involved in real estate development. More importantly, she had found that her background as an immigrant gave her insights into housing needs that were often overlooked by established developers. She understood which amenities mattered most to working families, how to design spaces that were both affordable and dignified, and how to navigate regulatory systems while maintaining ethical business practices. Her first major success had been the renovation of a 12-unit apartment building that had been condemned by the city. Isabella had spent 2 years learning about construction management, environmental remediation, and zoning regulations, while slowly transforming the property into housing that provided safe, affordable homes for immigrant families. The project had established her reputation as a developer who could tackle challenging properties while maintaining sensitivity to community needs. From that foundation, Isabella had built Sterling Enterprises into one of South Florida's most respected real estate development companies. She specialized in mixed-income housing developments that provided opportunities for families across economic levels to live in the same communities, breaking down some of the segregation that characterized much of Miami's residential landscape. Her projects consistently won awards for architectural innovation, environmental sustainability, and positive community impact. Isabella had never married, never had other children. Her entire adult life had been dedicated to building a successful business empire that could serve as proof to Diego that his mother had used the time they spent apart to become someone who could provide for him in ways that had been impossible when he was 3 years old. Every business decision, Every late night spent reviewing contracts, every risk taken on a new development project, had been motivated by the hope that someday Diego would search for her and find a woman who had transformed loss into purpose. Isabella kept a photograph of 3-year-old Diego on her desk, the last picture she had taken before they were separated at the border. The image showed a laughing child with bright eyes and an infectious smile, captured during one of their last happy moments together in El Salvador. Sometimes clients or employees asked about the child in the photo, and Isabella would simply say he was someone very important to her who lived far away. She'd also maintained a file cabinet filled with letters she had written to Diego over the years, communications she had never sent because she had promised John and Sarah Martinez that she would respect their family's privacy until Diego was old enough to make his own decisions about contact. The letters documented Isabella's journey from grief-stricken mother to successful businesswoman, sharing achievements and milestones she hoped someday to celebrate with the son who had inspired them. The morning that would change everything started like any other Tuesday in Isabella's carefully structured routine. She arrived at her office at 7 a.m., reviewed overnight emails from clients and contractors around the world, and began preparing for a busy day of property inspections and client meetings. Her assistant, Maria, had already arranged her schedule with the military precision that Isabella demanded from her organization. Isabella's morning routine included reading news from El Salvador, staying connected to developments in the country she had fled but never stopped caring about. She also spent time reviewing scholarship applications for the Diego Foundation, the educational program she had established to provide university funding for immigrant students pursuing degrees in architecture, engineering, or business. The foundation had been named for her son and had provided full scholarships for over 300 students during its 10 years of operation. At 9:30, Maria's voice came through the intercom connecting Isabella's office to the reception area. "Ms. Rodriguez, there's a young man here who says he needs to speak with you about a personal matter. He doesn't have an appointment, but he seems very insistent that it's important." Isabella looked up from the contracts she was reviewing, slightly annoyed by the interruption to her morning routine. Sterling Enterprises received frequent requests from job seekers, community organizations, and individuals hoping for charitable donations or investment opportunities. Isabella had learned to screen such requests carefully, focusing her time on interactions that could produce meaningful outcomes for her business or community initiatives. "Did he say what kind of personal matter?" Isabella asked, returning her attention to the development proposals she was evaluating. "He said it's about family," Maria replied, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "He's been waiting for over an hour, and he says he's willing to wait all day if necessary. He seems very nervous, but also very determined." Isabella felt a strange flutter in her chest at the word family. She had no extended family in Miami, no relatives who might show up unexpectedly at her office. Her parents had died years earlier in El Salvador, and she had lost touch with most other family members during her immigration to the United States and the subsequent years spent building her business. "What does he look like?" Isabella asked. Not sure why the question seemed important, but unable to shake the feeling that this visitor might be different from typical walk-in requests. Maria paused for a moment, and Isabella could hear her moving closer to the reception area windows. "He's probably in his early 20s, tall, dark hair. He looks familiar somehow, but I can't place where I might have seen him before. He's well-dressed, educated-looking, and Ms. Rodriguez, he keeps looking at the company photographs on the wall like he's searching for something." Isabella's heart began beating faster. 21 years old. That would be exactly Diego's age, if he were alive and healthy and grown into a young man. But Isabella had learned over the years not to let hope run ahead of reality, not to see connections that existed only in her desperate imagination. She had been disappointed too many times by strangers who reminded her of Diego, by young men whose features or mannerisms triggered memories of her son. "Send him in," Isabella said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But Maria, stay close to the intercom in case I need you to call security." Isabella stood up from her desk and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Biscayne Bay, trying to compose herself for what was probably just another business inquiry or community request dressed up as a family matter. She had learned to manage her expectations about unexpected visitors, to protect herself from the disappointment that came from hoping that strangers might somehow be connected to the son she had lost. But as Isabella looked out at the bay, she found herself thinking about the letters she had written to Diego over the years, wondering what he looked like now, whether he had grown tall like his father, whether he had maintained any memories of their life together before their separation. She had imagined this moment countless times, the possibility that Diego might someday appear at her office, grown into a man she would have to learn to know all over again. The sound of her office door opening made Isabella turn around, and she found herself face to face with a young man who made her breath catch in her throat and her legs feel suddenly unsteady. He was tall, probably 6 feet, with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably familiar. His features combined elements of Isabella's own face with characteristics she remembered from Miguel, creating a grown-up version of the toddler she had kissed goodbye 18 years earlier. The young man was impeccably dressed in a navy suit that suggested professional success, and he carried himself with confidence that indicated good education and social experience. But Isabella could also see nervousness in his posture, anxiety in the way he clutched a leather portfolio against his chest as if it contained something precious and fragile. "Ms. Rodriguez?" the young man said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested he had grown up speaking English but had learned Spanish as well. "My name is Diego Martinez. I think you might be my mother." Isabella felt the world tilt around her as if the earth had suddenly shifted on its axis. The contracts in her hand fell to the floor, scattering across the expensive carpeting as she gripped the edge of her desk to keep herself upright. The child she had been searching for in her heart for 18 years was standing in her office, grown into a handsome young man who carried her eyes and his father's smile. "Diego," Isabella whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer she had been reciting for 2 decades. Diego's eyes filled with tears as he saw Isabella's reaction, confirming what he had hoped but hadn't been certain about until this moment. "You remember me." Isabella crossed the space between them in 3 quick steps and pulled Diego into her arms, holding him with the desperate intensity of someone who had been afraid she might never have this chance again. Diego was taller than she was now, broader and stronger, but as he hugged her back, Isabella could feel echoes of the 3-year-old who used to fall asleep in her lap while she read him stories in Spanish. "I never stopped looking for you," Isabella said through her tears. "I never stopped hoping that someday you would come back to me." Diego held her tightly, his own emotions overwhelming his attempt to maintain composure. "I've been looking for you for 3 years, he said. "Ever since I turned 18, and my parents told me the whole story about my adoption and gave me permission to search for my birth family." Isabella pulled back to look at Diego's face, studying the features that combined familiar elements with the changes that 18 years had brought. She could see Miguel in the shape of his nose and the way his hair grew, but Diego's eyes were definitely hers, and his smile carried warmth that reminded her of the joyful child he had been. "Your parents?" Isabella asked, her voice catching on the word. "John and Sarah Martinez. Are you happy with them? Did they treat you well?" Diego's face lit up with genuine affection. "They're wonderful people, Mom. They raised me with so much love, gave me every opportunity, supported my dreams, and treated me like their biological son from the day I arrived in their home. But they also made sure I knew about you, about how much you loved me, about the impossible sacrifice you made to make sure I had the best possible life." Isabella sank into one of the chairs near her office windows, her legs finally giving way to the emotional impact of this reunion. Diego settled beside her, as if they had been having conversations like this for years, instead of meeting for the first time since he was 3 years old. "Tell me about your life," Isabella said, reaching out to touch Diego's face, as if to confirm that he was really there. "Tell me about school, your friends, what you want to do with your future. Tell me about the man you've become." Diego smiled, and Isabella could see traces of the joyful child she remembered in his expression. "I graduated from Arizona State University last year with a degree in civil engineering. I'm working for a sustainable construction company in Phoenix, but I'm planning to go to graduate school to study sustainable architecture and urban planning. I want to design affordable housing for immigrant communities, buildings that are environmentally efficient and culturally appropriate." Isabella felt her heart swell with pride. Diego had grown into exactly the kind of young man she had hoped he would become. Educated, ambitious, and committed to using his opportunities to help others who face the same challenges she had experienced. "How did you find me?" Isabella asked, still struggling to believe that her son was actually sitting beside her after 18 years of separation. Diego pulled out his phone and showed Isabella a series of news articles and business profiles featuring her success in Miami real estate development. "I've been researching online for 3 years, trying to find any trace of Isabella Rodriguez from El Salvador, who came to the United States around 2005. There are thousands of Isabella Rodriguezes in America, but when I found articles about your business and saw your photograph, I knew it was you immediately." Isabella looked at the articles Diego had collected, seeing her own professional achievements through the eyes of the son who had been searching for her. "I built all of this, hoping that someday you would come looking for me," she said. "I wanted to be able to show you that your mother had made something meaningful with the life you made possible." "Mom," Diego said, taking her hand with the natural affection of someone who had been raised to express love openly, "you don't need to prove anything to me. John and Sarah told me about the conditions you left behind in El Salvador, about the danger we faced, about the impossible choice you had to make at the border. They made sure I understood that everything you did was because you loved me more than your own life." Isabella squeezed Diego's hand, marveling at the maturity and wisdom he had developed despite his young age. "Do you remember anything about our life before? About El Salvador? Or the journey? Or our time together before we were separated?" Diego was quiet for a moment, searching his memory for traces of experiences from his earliest childhood. "I remember fragments. I remember someone singing to me in Spanish, someone who smelled like flowers and always felt safe. I remember being scared and crying during a long trip and someone holding me and promising that everything would be okay. John and Sarah think those memories are probably of you." Isabella's throat tightened with emotion. "I sang to you every night. Las Mañanitas and old folk songs my grandmother taught me, and I always wore jasmine perfume because you said it smelled like the flowers in our garden back home." "I still love the smell of jasmine," Diego said softly. "I never understood why until now, and sometimes I find myself humming melodies I don't remember learning. Sarah says I've been doing that since I was little." Isabella and Diego spent the next 6 hours talking, sharing stories about the 18 years they had spent apart, and beginning the complex process of rebuilding a relationship that had been interrupted by circumstances beyond either of their control. Diego told Isabella about his childhood in Phoenix, his academic achievements, his relationships with John and Sarah and his adoptive siblings, and his plans for graduate school and his future career. Isabella shared the story of her journey from cleaning offices at night to building a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, describing the motivation she had drawn from her love for Diego and her determination to become worthy of being his mother when he was old enough to search for her. She showed him photographs of properties she had developed, awards she had received, and scholarship programs she had established in his honor. I named the scholarship program the Diego Foundation, Isabella said, showing him documents from the program that had provided educational funding for over 300 immigrant students. I couldn't help you directly, but I could help other young people who faced similar challenges to the ones I experienced coming to this country. Diego stared at the documents with amazement and tears in his eyes. You named it after me? Everything I've built has been for you, Isabella said simply. Every property I've developed, every business decision I've made, every late night I spent working instead of sleeping. It was all because I hoped that someday I could show you that your mother had used the time we spent apart to become someone who could make you proud. Diego's voice broke as he responded. Mom, I was already proud of you. John and Sarah made sure I knew that you were a brave, intelligent woman who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities you couldn't provide under the circumstances we faced. I've been proud of you my entire life. As the afternoon progressed, Isabella and Diego began discussing the practical aspects of rebuilding their relationship. Diego lived in Phoenix and had job commitments there, while Isabella's business empire was based in Miami with properties throughout the Southeast. But both of them were committed to finding ways to maintain regular contact and to make up for lost time. I want you to meet John and Sarah, Diego said, pulling out photographs of the people who had raised him. They've been hoping for this reunion almost as much as I have. They always said that a child who was loved by two sets of parents was the luckiest child in the world. Isabella studied the photographs, seeing images of family gatherings, school events, and everyday moments that documented Diego's childhood with the people who had provided the stable home she had wanted for him. Do they feel threatened by me wanting a relationship with you? Diego smiled broadly. They're the ones who encouraged me to search for you. They said that loving you and being grateful for the family they built with me weren't mutually exclusive emotions. They want to thank you for the sacrifice you made that allowed them to become parents and to raise me with the love and opportunities every child deserves. Duty. Over the following months, Isabella and Diego worked carefully to build a relationship that honored both the love they had shared during his early childhood and the separate lives they had lived during their 18 years apart. The process required patience from both of them as they learned to relate to each other as the people they had become rather than the people they had been when Diego was 3 years old. Diego visited Miami every few weeks, learning about Isabella's business and helping her develop new projects focused on affordable housing for immigrant communities. He brought fresh perspectives from his engineering education and his generation's understanding of sustainability and social responsibility. Isabella was amazed by Diego's intelligence, his creativity, and his commitment to using his education for community benefit rather than just personal advancement. Isabella also traveled to Phoenix to meet John and Sarah Martinez, the couple who had raised her son with love and wisdom, while never trying to erase her from his identity. The meeting had been emotional for all of them, but it had also been healing in ways Isabella hadn't anticipated. We always knew this day would come, Sarah Martinez told Isabella during their first meeting in the comfortable living room where Diego had grown up. We raised Diego to be proud of his heritage and to understand that he had a birth mother who loved him enough to make impossible sacrifices for his welfare. We're not losing a son by sharing him with you. We're gaining an extended family. John Martinez had been equally welcoming, sharing stories about Diego's childhood and expressing gratitude for Isabella's decision to consent to the adoption. You gave us the greatest gift anyone could give, he told Isabella. You trusted us with your most precious person, and we've tried every day to be worthy of that trust. The Martinez family included 2 other children, a daughter they had adopted from foster care when Diego was 7, and a son they had adopted 3 years later. Diego had grown up as the protective older brother in a family that celebrated diversity and understood the complexities of adoption and blended families. Diego has always been our advocate for other kids in care, Sarah explained to Isabella. He remembers what it felt like to be separated from family, so he's always been extra gentle with children who are going through similar experiences. Isabella spent a week in Phoenix, staying in the Martinez family's guest room and participating in the daily routines that had shaped Diego's adolescence and young adulthood. She attended his college graduation ceremony, an event she had dreamed of witnessing but never expected to experience. She met his friends, saw his childhood bedroom, and gained understanding of the loving, stable environment that had allowed him to thrive despite the trauma of their early separation. Diego eventually decided to attend graduate school in Miami, choosing a program in sustainable architecture at the University of Miami that would allow him to spend more time with Isabella while pursuing his educational goals. Isabella helped him find an apartment near her own home in Coral Gables, and slowly, carefully, they began building the kind of daily relationship that had been interrupted by circumstances 18 years earlier. The process wasn't always easy. Both Isabella and Diego had to adjust their expectations and learn to relate to each other as independent adults, rather than the mother and small child they had been. Isabella had to resist the urge to try to make up for 18 years of lost time by overwhelming Diego with attention and gifts. Diego had to balance his loyalty to John and Sarah with his desire to build a meaningful relationship with Isabella, while also managing the demands of graduate school and his own career aspirations. But gradually, they found rhythms that worked for their unique situation. Isabella taught Diego about his Salvadoran heritage, sharing family recipes and stories about his grandparents and great-grandparents who had died before he could meet them. She helped him understand the historical and political context that had shaped their family's experience with migration and separation. Diego helped Isabella understand new technologies and business strategies, contributing fresh perspectives to her real estate empire while learning about entrepreneurship and community development. He also challenged her to think more innovatively about sustainability and social impact, pushing her company to adopt more environmentally responsible practices. Most importantly, they learned to appreciate the ways their 18 years apart had shaped them into people who could contribute meaningfully to each other's lives. Isabella's success had given her resources and connections that could help Diego achieve his architectural goals, while Diego's education and idealism brought energy and purpose to Isabella's business ventures that had been missing during her years of building wealth primarily as a hedge against future uncertainty. 1 year after their reunion, Isabella and Diego stood together at the groundbreaking ceremony for the first affordable housing project they had designed and developed together. The development would provide homes for 75 immigrant families, incorporating sustainable design principles that Diego had learned in graduate school, with practical features that Isabella had identified through her decades of real estate experience. The project had been challenging to finance and develop, requiring Isabella to use her established relationships with investors and city officials, while Diego contributed innovative design solutions that maximized both affordability and environmental efficiency. They had worked together for 8 months, learning to combine Isabella's business experience with Diego's technical knowledge and shared commitment to community service. "This is what I always dreamed of," Isabella told the crowd gathered for the ceremony, which included city officials, community leaders, and families who would eventually live in the new development. "Not just building successful businesses, but building them with my son, using our shared experiences to create opportunities for families who face the same challenges we once faced." Diego stood beside his mother, wearing a hard hat and holding architectural plans for the development they had created together. "My mother taught me that sacrifice and love can survive any separation," he said when Isabella invited him to speak to the crowd. "She also taught me that success isn't meaningful unless it's used to help others." This housing project represents both lessons. It's the result of a love that survived 18 years of separation, and it's designed to help other families avoid the kinds of separations that defined our early relationship. After the ceremony, Isabella and Diego walked through the construction site together, pointing out features of the buildings that would soon house families, not unlike they had been 18 years earlier. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the foundation work, and Isabella could see in those shadows echoes of all the mornings she had wondered whether she would ever see her son again. "Do you ever regret the decision I made?" Isabella asked Diego as they stood looking out over the future homes they were building together. Diego took his mother's hand, the same gesture that had comforted her during their first reunion in her office a year earlier. "Mom, I regret that we had to spend 18 years apart. I regret the circumstances that forced you to make an impossible choice. But I don't regret the decision you made, because it led to John and Sarah raising me with love. And it led to you building something amazing while you waited for me to come back to you." Isabella felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked at the son who had grown into a man of wisdom, compassion, and purpose, despite, or perhaps because of, the unusual circumstances of his childhood. "I spent 18 years wondering if I had made the right choice. Now I know that the right choice was trusting that love would find a way to bring us back together when we were both ready." Diego squeezed his mother's hand and smiled. "Besides, look what we're building now. This housing project exists because you spent 18 years learning how to develop real estate, and I spent 18 years learning how to design sustainable architecture. We needed that time apart to become the people who could create this together." Isabella looked around at the construction site that represented not just their current collaboration, but also the healing of wounds that had been 18 years in the making. The single mother millionaire who had thought she had lost her son forever had discovered that some losses are temporary, some separations are preparation for better reunions, and some sacrifices create opportunities for more meaningful success than could ever have been achieved without them. The son she had given up to ensure his welfare had returned to her as a partner in work that honored both their individual journeys and their shared commitment to helping other families avoid the separations they had endured. And perhaps most importantly, both of them had learned that love doesn't disappear during long separations. It just waits patiently for the right moment to transform loss into reunion, sacrifice into partnership, and pain into purpose that can change not just their own lives, but the lives of countless other families who deserve the chance to stay together and thrive.